Chapter 6. Do it again, Scarlett said, sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor with a notebook in her lap like she was conducting some kind of supernatural field study. Damien, who was crouched in the middle of her living room in what could generously be called a partial transformation, gave her a look that was part exasperation, part amusement. His eyes had gone full golden, there was dark hair covering his arms, and his canine teeth had extended into something that definitely belonged in a nature documentary. "This is the 5th time," he pointed out, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm being thorough," Scarlett replied, making notes. "The transformation seems to be triggered by strong emotions. Anger, protectiveness, territorial instincts. Can you do just the eyes?" "Just the eyes?" "Yeah, like werewolf light." Damien stared at her. "You're treating this like a science experiment. Well, what did you expect? Swooning? Screaming? Running away in terror?" Scarlett looked up from her notebook. "You're a werewolf. That's weird, but it's not the weirdest thing that's happened to me this week. What could possibly be weirder than finding out you're, whatever I am to you, turns into a wolf? Finding out that my whatever you are bought my workplace with embezzled werewolf money to keep me employed," Scarlett replied promptly. "The supernatural stuff is actually kind of cool. It's the controlling, stalkerish, making decisions about my life without asking stuff that's the problem." Damien's shoulders sagged, and some of the wolf features started to fade back to human normal. "I know. I'm working on it. Are you?" Scarlett set down her notebook and looked at him seriously. "Because 3 days ago you nearly killed my ex-boyfriend for touching my wrist. He was hurting you." He grabbed my wrist, Damien. "I've had worse injuries opening pickle jars. But he was threatening, yes. Creepy, absolutely. Potentially dangerous, maybe." Scarlett held up a hand to stop his protest. "But that was my situation to handle. Mine, not yours. You're my mate," Damien said quietly. "I'm my own person first," Scarlett replied firmly. "And if this is going to work, whatever this is, you need to understand that protecting me doesn't mean making my choices for me." Damien was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to memorize it. "What if I can't help it? The protective instincts, I mean, they're not entirely human." "Then we'll figure it out together," Scarlett said, echoing her words from the restaurant. "But you have to try." "I can try." "Good." She picked up her notebook again. "Now show me the partial transformation thing again. I want to see if you can control which parts change." What Scarlett didn't know was that while she was conducting her werewolf research session, Jackson was 3 blocks away, having what could charitably be called a complete mental breakdown. "This is a disaster," he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in his overpriced studio apartment. A complete and total disaster. The plan had been simple. Hire fake boyfriends to make Damien jealous, snap him out of his human obsession, restore pack order. Instead, they'd accidentally hired Scarlett's actual stalker ex-boyfriend. Damien had nearly transformed in public, and now their alpha was spending his evenings at the human's apartment playing supernatural show and tell. Jackson had been watching from the fire escape across the street, perfectly normal pack surveillance, nothing creepy about it, and had witnessed Damien demonstrating his partial transformation abilities like some kind of party trick. It was humiliating. It was dangerous. And it was all that human's fault. Clearly, Scarlett Hayes needed to disappear. For the good of the pack. For Damien's own protection. For the preservation of werewolf secrecy everywhere. Jackson pulled out his laptop and began researching. How hard could it be to arrange a few accidents? The next morning, Scarlett was walking to work when a piano fell out of the sky. Well, not exactly out of the sky. It fell from the 3rd-floor window of a building she was passing, where a moving company was apparently having the worst day in the history of furniture relocation. The ancient upright piano crashed onto the sidewalk exactly where she would have been standing if she hadn't stopped to tie her shoe 30 seconds earlier. "Holy shit," she breathed, staring at the wreckage. "Are you kidding me? Ma'am, are you okay?" One of the movers came rushing down, looking pale and shaken. "The rope just snapped. We've never had anything like this happen before." "I'm fine," Scarlett said, stepping carefully around the scattered piano keys. "Just really bad timing." She made it to corner grind without further incident, but spent the morning feeling unsettled. Near-death experiences tended to have that effect. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus observed, watching her fumble with the espresso machine. "A piano fell on me this morning." What now?" "Well, not on me exactly. More like where I would have been if I hadn't stopped to tie my shoe." Marcus stared at her. "Girl, are you sure you're not cursed? Because between the mysterious Suitcase, the billionaire stalker, and now pianos falling from the sky. Your luck has been seriously questionable lately. It's just coincidence, Scarlett said, but she found herself looking up nervously every time she walked under a building overhang. The food truck incident happened 2 days later. Scarlett was on her lunch break, walking to the little cafe where she usually ate her sad desk salad, and where Jackson had noted she went every Wednesday, when a food truck jumped the curb and came barreling straight toward her. She dove behind a parked car just in time, skinning her palms on the sidewalk as the truck crashed into a fire hydrant, sending water geysering into the air. "What the hell?" she gasped, scrambling to her feet. The food truck driver was climbing out of his cab, looking dazed and confused. "I don't know what happened," he kept saying. "The brakes just stopped working. They were working fine this morning." Scarlett looked at her scraped palms, then at the truck, then at the growing crowd of onlookers pulling out phones to record the chaos. 2 accidents in 3 days, both of which could have killed her if she hadn't been lucky. That wasn't coincidence. That was, well, she didn't know what that was. But it was starting to feel personal. Meanwhile, Jackson was discovering that hiring assassins on Craigslist was significantly more complicated than hiring fake boyfriends. The piano thing had been a stroke of genius. He'd simply paid the moving company extra to use old ropes and make sure they were working directly above Scarlett's usual walking route. But the food truck driver had demanded way too much money and then gotten cold feet at the last minute, which explained why his brake-cutting job had been so sloppy. Clearly, if he wanted something done right, he was going to have to do it himself. That evening, Scarlett was walking home from work when she became aware of something following her. Not something. She could hear it padding along behind her, staying in the shadows, matching her pace perfectly. Every time she stopped, it stopped. Every time she sped up, it sped up. Her heart hammering, she ducked into a bodega and pretended to browse the magazine rack while sneaking glances out the window. There, sitting under a streetlight like it owned the place, was the biggest dog she'd ever seen. It looked like a German shepherd crossed with a small wolf, with thick dark fur and intelligent golden eyes that seemed to be watching the bodega with laser focus. As she stared, it tilted its head slightly, and she could swear it was looking directly at her. "You okay, hon?" asked the bodega owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "There's a dog outside," Scarlett said weakly. The woman looked out the window and shrugged. "Probably a stray. We get a lot of them around here. Big one, though. Looks well-fed for a street dog." Scarlett bought a bottle of water she didn't need and lingered in the store for another 10 minutes. But when she finally worked up the courage to leave, the dog was gone. She made it home without further incident, but she could have sworn she heard padding footsteps following her all the way to her building. That night she barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made her jump, and she found herself checking the locks on her door obsessively. Around 3 a.m., she heard something that made her blood run cold, a low, mournful howl that seemed to be coming from right outside her building. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds, expecting to see nothing. Instead, she saw the dog from earlier, sitting on the fire escape of the building across the street, its head tilted back as it howled at the moon. As she watched, it stopped howling and looked directly at her window. Even from this distance, she could see its golden eyes gleaming in the streetlight. Then it settled down on the fire escape, like it was planning to stay there all night. "What the hell?" Scarlett whispered. The next morning, the dog was gone, but there were muddy paw prints on her fire escape. "Okay," she said aloud to her empty apartment. "This is getting weird." She called Damien while she was getting ready for work. "I think I'm being stalked," she said without preamble when he answered. "What?" His voice went sharp with alarm. "By who?" "Jake." "Did he?" "Not by a person. By a dog." Silence. "A dog," Damien repeated. "A really big dog. Like German shepherd size, but bigger. With golden eyes. It's been following me around, and last night it was howling outside my building." More silence. "Damien? Are you there?" "I'm here," he said, and his voice sounded strained. "Can you describe this dog?" "Dark fur, really thick. Golden eyes. Moves like it's, I don't know, intelligent? Like it knows what it's doing." Scarlett paused. "You don't think it's dangerous, do you?" "No," Damien said quickly. "No, I don't think it's dangerous." "How can you be sure?" "Because." Damien was quiet for a long moment. "Because I think I might know whose dog it is." "Oh, well, maybe you could talk to them? It's kind of creepy having it follow me around." "I'll handle it," Damien said. "In the meantime, be careful, okay? After those accidents you've been having, I just want to make sure you're safe. You think the accidents and the dog are connected? I don't know. Maybe. Just be careful. After she hung up, Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that Damien knew more than he was telling her. But then that seemed to be his default setting. That evening, she stopped at the grocery store on her way home and bought a bag of the most expensive dog food she could find, along with a large bowl. If she was going to have a supernatural stalker dog, she might as well make sure it was well fed. She set the bowl on her fire escape before going to bed, along with another bowl of water. Sure enough, when she woke up the next morning, both bowls were empty and there was a single dark hair caught on the fire escape railing. She held it up to the light, examining it. It was coarser than human hair, but softer than she'd expected from a dog. Almost like wolf hair, she said aloud, then immediately felt ridiculous. Right. Because that's a logical conclusion. My stalker dog is actually a wolf. In Manhattan. But as she got ready for work, she found herself thinking about golden eyes and protective instincts, and the way Damien had sounded when she'd described her mysterious guardian. When Jackson's third assassination attempt, a carefully loosened scaffolding that should have collapsed as Scarlett walked underneath, was mysteriously discovered and repaired before she arrived at the construction site, he began to suspect he wasn't the only one watching Scarlett Hayes. Someone or something was protecting her. And Jackson had a growing suspicion he knew exactly what that something was. That night, instead of planning his next attempt on Scarlett's life, he found himself crouched on a rooftop across from her building, watching a large, dark shape settle onto her fire escape. A shape that looked suspiciously like his alpha in wolf form. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Jackson muttered. As if it had heard him, the wolf's head turned in his direction, golden eyes finding him unerringly in the darkness. For a moment, they stared at each other across the space between buildings. Then the wolf's lips pulled back, revealing very large, very sharp teeth in what was definitely not a friendly expression. Jackson decided that maybe assassination attempts could wait until he figured out a way to get past his alpha's supernatural protection detail. Down on the fire escape, Damien settled back into position, ears pricked for any sound of danger. The food and water bowls Scarlett had left out were an unexpected bonus, but they weren't why he was here. Someone was trying to hurt his mate. He could smell the scent of planned violence in the air, could sense the malicious intent that had been following Scarlett around for days. He didn't know who was behind the accidents, but he knew they weren't accidents. And he knew that as long as he was here, nothing would get past him to hurt her. Inside her apartment, Scarlett was curled up in bed, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. She dreamed of golden eyes and warm fur, and the feeling of being absolutely, completely safe. Chapter 7. The man sitting across from Jackson in the dimly lit bar looked like he'd stepped out of a crime thriller. Scarred hands, dead eyes, and the kind of stillness that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface. His name was Victor, and according to his credentials, he specialized in making problems disappear permanently. "You want me to kill a barista?" Victor said in accented English, his voice flat and professional. "I want you to make it look like an accident," Jackson corrected, sliding an envelope across the table. "Something untraceable. She's been having a run of bad luck lately. This would just be the final unfortunate incident." Victor opened the envelope and counted the cash inside with practiced efficiency. "This is substantial money for one human female. She must be very dangerous." "She's destroying my pack," Jackson said simply, which wasn't entirely untrue. "My alpha has become compromised. Obsessed. She's turned him into something weak." "Ah," Victor nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Love makes fools of powerful men. Very well. It will be done within 48 hours. As Victor pocketed the money and stood to leave, Jackson felt a mixture of relief and guilt. This would solve everything. Damien would grieve, certainly, but eventually he'd realize that Jackson had saved him from a fate worse than death, being mated to a human. What Jackson didn't know was that across the bar, nursing a whiskey and pretending to read a newspaper, sat another werewolf entirely. Marcus, Damien's beta and second-in-command, had been following Jackson for 3 days, growing increasingly concerned about the younger wolf's behavior. When he saw Jackson hand over an envelope full of cash to a man who reeked of death and gunpowder, he knew the situation had escalated beyond pack politics. As soon as both men left the bar, Marcus was on his phone. "Alpha," he said when Damien answered. "We have a problem. A big one." 40 minutes later, Damien was standing in Marcus's apartment, staring at photographs taken with a telephoto lens, clear shots of Jackson meeting with Victor, the exchange of money, the handshake that sealed Scarlett's death warrant. How long? Damien's voice was deadly calm, but Marcus could see the wolf lurking just beneath his alpha's human facade. Victor's reputation suggests within 48 hours. Probably less. And you're certain about the target? Marcus nodded grimly. I followed him afterward. Jackson went straight to her building, took photos, probably to give Victor a better shot. Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pictures. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. He hired someone to murder my mate. Alpha. My own pack member. Someone I trusted. Someone I've known for 15 years. Damien's hands were starting to shake, and Marcus could smell the fury rolling off him in waves. He hired a professional killer to murder the woman I love. What are your orders? Damien looked up, and Marcus saw something in his alpha's eyes that made him take an involuntary step back. It was the kind of cold, calculated rage that had made Damien the most feared werewolf in the tri-state area. Find Victor, Damien said quietly. Convince him to cancel his contract. And if he won't be convinced, then make sure he understands that Scarlet Hayes is under the protection of the Blackthorn Pack. Permanently. And Jackson. The silence stretched out until Marcus began to wonder if his alpha had heard him. Jackson, Damien said finally, is no longer part of this pack. Meanwhile, Scarlet was having what could charitably be described as the worst Tuesday of her life, which was saying something considering her recent track record. It had started when she'd arrived at Corner Grind to find Victoria Sterling waiting for her with a briefcase and an expression that suggested someone was about to have a very unpleasant conversation. Ms. Hayes, Victoria said politely, I think it's time we discussed your employment situation. My employment situation? Scarlet tied her apron with shaking fingers, suddenly certain she was about to be fired. Is this about Damien? Because I know our relationship is complicated, but I've never let it interfere with my work. On the contrary, Victoria interrupted smoothly, this is about the fact that Mr. Blackthorn owns this establishment. Scarlet went very still. I'm sorry, what? Victoria opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. Blackthorn Industries acquired Corner Grind Coffee through a subsidiary company approximately 6 months ago. The previous owner was facing bankruptcy, and Mr. Blackthorn purchased the business to prevent its closure. The words seemed to echo in Scarlet's head like gunshots. He bought the coffee shop. Yes. He also personally approved your continued employment, along with a rather substantial raise that you may not have noticed due to creative accounting. Scarlet sank onto one of the cafe's stools, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. He bought my job. Technically, he bought your workplace. The job you've maintained through your own competence. 6 months ago, Scarlet said slowly. That's when he started coming in here every day, ordering 17 coffees and watching me work. Yes, Mr. Blackthorn has always been hands-on with his investments. The full scope of Damien's deception was starting to hit her like a freight train. He saved my job, without telling me, by buying the entire business. Mr. Blackthorn prefers his charitable works to remain anonymous. Charitable works? Scarlet's voice cracked. Is that what this is? Charity. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Ms. Hayes, I've worked for Mr. Blackthorn for 8 years. I've never seen him take a personal interest in any of his acquisitions before. This wasn't charity. This was something else entirely. Before Scarlet could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and Marcus walked in looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Ms. Hayes, he said gravely, we need to talk. If this is about Damien, it's about someone trying to kill you. The words hit Scarlet like a physical blow. What? Marcus looked around the cafe, which thankfully was empty except for one customer reading a newspaper in the corner. Perhaps we should speak privately. Victoria, demonstrating the kind of professional competence that probably made her invaluable, smoothly approached the customer and engaged him in conversation about the weather while guiding him toward the exit. As soon as they were alone, Marcus turned to Scarlet with an expression that was equal parts grim and apologetic. Jackson has hired a professional assassin to kill you, he said without preamble. The attempts you've been having, the piano, the food truck, those weren't accidents. And the next one won't be designed to fail. Scarlet stared at him. Someone in Damien's pack is trying to murder me? Jackson believes you're a threat to pack stability. He thinks if you're removed, Damien will return to normal. Normal, Scarlet repeated faintly. Alpha behavior, yes. Jackson doesn't understand that what Damien feels for you isn't obsession. It's genuine pair bonding. To a werewolf, that's sacred. Permanent. Jackson might as well have tried to cut off Damien's arm. The room started to spin slightly. So the accidents were assassination attempts, yes. Jackson hired contractors, people who didn't know about our supernatural nature. When they kept failing, partly due to luck, partly due to Damien's protection, he decided to hire professionals. Damien's been protecting me, Scarlett said slowly, remembering the large dog that had been following her around. The dog outside my building. That's him, isn't it? Marcus nodded. He's been sleeping in wolf form on your fire escape every night for the past week. He could sense the malicious intent around you, even if he didn't know the source. And now you do know the source. Jackson is no longer a member of our pack as of 1 hour ago, Marcus said grimly. The assassin will be discouraged from fulfilling his contract. You're safe. Scarlett looked around the cafe, her workplace, which Damien had bought without telling her. At Victoria, who was tactfully pretending not to listen while reorganizing the sugar packets. At Marcus, who was delivering the news that a werewolf had tried to have her killed like he was discussing the weather. I need some air, she said weakly. She stumbled outside, leaving Marcus and Victoria to exchange worried glances behind her. The street was busy with the usual Manhattan chaos, but Scarlett barely saw any of it. Her mind was reeling with the implications of everything she'd just learned. Damien hadn't just been stalking her, he'd been orchestrating her entire life. Buying her workplace, ensuring her employment, protecting her from dangers she didn't even know existed. All while writing terrible poetry about claiming her under moonlight and sleeping outside her door in wolf form. It should have felt romantic. The gesture of a man so devoted that he'd move mountains to keep her safe and employed. Instead, it felt like the most elaborate cage ever constructed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. Need to see you. Important. Can you come to my office? Scarlett stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Your office in the building you own, where you employ the assistant who just told me about the coffee shop you bought without mentioning it. That office? Her phone started ringing immediately. Scarlett. Did you buy Corner Grind? She asked without preamble. Silence. Damien. Did you buy my workplace without telling me? Yes, he said quietly. But I can explain. Can you explain why you've been controlling every aspect of my life for 6 months while pretending it was all coincidence? It wasn't about control. It was about protection. About making sure you were safe and secure and completely dependent on you without knowing it, Scarlett finished. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Scarlett, please. Come to my office. Let me explain properly. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I can't. I need time to think. About what? About whether any of this is real, or if I'm just some project you decided to take on. You're not a project, Damien said desperately. You're my mate. My partner. I'm a person, Damien. A person who deserves to make her own choices about her own life. And you've been taking those choices away from me since the day we met. She hung up before he could respond. For the next 3 days, Scarlett avoided every place where Damien might find her. She stayed away from Corner Grind, avoided her apartment except to sleep, and spent most of her time in libraries and parks trying to sort through her feelings. The rational part of her brain understood that Damien had been trying to help. The coffee shop had been failing, she would have lost her job, and he'd stepped in to prevent that. The protection from Jackson's assassination attempts had literally saved her life. But the emotional part of her brain couldn't get past the manipulation. The way he'd orchestrated their meeting, controlled her circumstances, made himself indispensable to her life without her knowledge or consent. On Thursday afternoon, she was sitting in Central Park, trying to read a book, when she became aware of someone approaching. Not Damien, she would have sensed him by now, she'd gotten that attuned to his presence. This was someone else. Someone female, tall, and moving with the kind of confidence that suggested she was used to being noticed. Excuse me, said a voice like honey and silk. Are you Scarlett Hayes? Scarlett looked up to see a woman who belonged on magazine covers. Tall, blonde, with cheekbones that could cut glass, and the kind of effortless elegance that probably came with a trust fund and personal stylists. Yes, Scarlett said warily. The woman smiled, and it was sharp enough to draw blood. I'm Isabel Montgomery. I used to date Damien. Something cold settled in Scarlett's stomach. Okay. I heard about your little situation. The pack politics, the drama. It must be so stressful for you. Isabel's voice dripped sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. especially now that you've discovered how manipulative he can be. I don't think that's any of your business. Of course not. I just wanted you to know that when you inevitably realize this relationship is impossible, some of us understand what you're going through. Isabel sat down on the bench without being invited, close enough that Scarlett could smell her expensive perfume. Damien has a pattern, you know. He finds someone vulnerable, someone who needs saving, and he becomes obsessed with being their hero. Is that what happened with you? Oh no, Isabel laughed, a sound like silver bells with razor edges. I was never vulnerable. That's why it didn't work out. Damien needs to be needed, you see. He needs someone who can't survive without his protection, his money, his intervention. Scarlett felt something ugly twist in her chest. And you think that's me? Isn't it? Isabel's smile was all teeth. You're a barista, darling. He's a billionaire. He bought your workplace, your security, probably your loyalty too. Without him, what do you have? I have myself, Scarlett said quietly, but even as she said it, she could hear the doubt in her own voice. Do you? Or do you just have what he's allowed you to keep? Isabel stood up, smoothing down her designer dress. I'm not trying to be cruel, Scarlett. I actually think you seem lovely. But Damien will never see you as an equal. You'll always be his project, his charity case, his little human pet who needs to be managed and protected. She walked away, leaving Scarlett sitting alone on the bench with her thoughts spinning in increasingly dark directions. Was that what she was to Damien? A project? A charity case? But even as the doubts swirled in her mind, another emotion was building underneath them. Something hot and possessive and completely irrational. Because regardless of what Isabel had said, regardless of Damien's manipulations and controlling behavior, one fact remained clear. Damien was hers. And no perfectly manicured ex-girlfriend with designer everything and a trust fund was going to change that. Which was how Scarlett found herself doing something she'd never done in her entire life. Stalking someone. She followed Isabel from the park to an upscale restaurant, where the blonde woman met with two other women who looked like they'd stepped out of the same catalog. They spent 2 hours discussing what sounded like plans to accidentally run into Damien at various social events over the next week. By the time Scarlett left the restaurant, she was seeing red. That evening, she called Damien for the first time in 3 days. Scarlett, he sounded breathless, like he'd run to answer the phone. Are you okay? Are you safe? I've been going crazy not knowing. I'm fine, she cut him off. I need to ask you something. Anything. Isabel Montgomery. How serious were you two? Silence. Damien. Not very, he said carefully. We dated for a few months last year. Why? She came to see me today. Had some very interesting things to say about your patterns. Scarlett, whatever she told you. She's planning to run into you at the Hartley Foundation Gala tomorrow night, Scarlett interrupted. Along with her friends. They're going to make sure you know I'm not there. I don't care about Isabel or any gala. I care about you. Good, Scarlett said, surprising herself with the possessive edge in her voice. Because I'm going with you. You want to go to a charity gala? I want to make sure every woman there knows you're taken, Scarlett said, then immediately flushed at her own words. You mean you're feeling possessive, Damien said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Don't read too much into it. Too late, he said warmly. I'm reading everything into it. Scarlett closed her eyes, fighting the warmth that was spreading through her chest. Damien, we still need to talk. About the coffee shop, about the controlling behavior, about... I know, and we will. But first, let me take you shopping for a dress that will make Isabel Montgomery cry into her champagne. Despite everything, the lies, the manipulation, the attempted assassination, Scarlett found herself smiling. Fine, she said. But I'm picking the dress. And you're paying for it. Deal. And Damien? Yes. If you ever buy my workplace again without telling me, I'm feeding your journal to a pack of actual wolves. His laughter followed her all the way to sleep. Chapter 8. The Hartley Foundation Gala had been a complete success, if by success you meant Scarlett had established dominance over Isabel Montgomery, so thoroughly that the blonde had actually fled to the bathroom in tears. The sight of Scarlett in a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than her rent, hanging off Damien's arm like she owned him, had apparently sent a very clear message to every eligible socialite in Manhattan. Damien was hers. End of discussion. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The council is coming, Marcus announced without preamble as he burst into Damien's penthouse the next morning, where Scarlett was enjoying what she'd decided to call reconciliation pancakes while wearing one of Damien's dress shirts. Damien, who'd been making coffee with the kind of precise attention usually reserved for surgical procedures, went very still. When? This afternoon. Emergency session. The other alphas got wind of the Jackson situation and they're concerned. Concerned about what? Scarlett asked, though something in Marcus's expression suggested she wasn't going to like the answer. About Damien's leadership capabilities, Marcus replied grimly. When pack members start hiring human assassins to kill their alpha's mate, it raises questions about pack stability. What kind of questions? Damien's voice had gone dangerously quiet. The kind that end with leadership challenges and public trials, Marcus said. They want to evaluate whether your attachment to. He glanced at Scarlett apologetically. To a human has compromised your ability to lead. Scarlett set down her fork. They want to put Damien on trial for dating me? They want to determine whether he's fit to remain alpha, Marcus corrected. The council has the authority to strip pack leaders of their position if they're deemed unstable. Unstable, Scarlett repeated flatly. Compromised by human attachment, Marcus clarified. It's happened before. Alpha Stevens 3 years ago. He mated with a human, lost focus on pack priorities, and when his beta challenged him. I remember what happened to Stevens, Damien interrupted. The question is whether they're planning to offer me the same choice. What choice? Scarlett looked between them, not liking the tension in the room. Renounce the human mate or forfeit the pack, Marcus said quietly. The silence that followed was so complete that Scarlett could hear her own heartbeat. Well, she said finally, standing up and wrapping Damien's shirt more tightly around herself. That's not happening. Both men stared at her. I'm sorry, what? Marcus said. I said that's not happening. Nobody's making Damien choose between me and his pack. Scarlett, Damien said carefully, the council isn't exactly open to negotiation. Then it's a good thing I'm not planning to negotiate. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, her mind already racing with possibilities. Where are you going? Damien called after her. To prepare my defense. Your defense? For the trial, which I'm obviously attending. Scarlett, humans don't attend council meetings. Ever. She turned back to look at him, and Damien felt something shift in his chest at the fierce determination in her eyes. Well, she said with a smile that would have made a shark proud, I guess they're about to make an exception. For hours later, the Blackthorn Industries boardroom had been transformed into something that looked like a supernatural court of law. The long mahogany table was surrounded by 5 of the most intimidating people Scarlett had ever seen. 4 men and 1 woman, all radiating the kind of predatory authority that made every instinct she had scream, run away. These were the Council Alphas, the werewolves who governed supernatural law in the northeastern United States. They looked like they could bench press small cars and tear apart anyone who annoyed them with their bare hands. Damien sat at one end of the table, wearing his most expensive suit-like armor. He looked calm and controlled, but Scarlett could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching on the table. The charges are serious, said the woman, who'd introduced herself as Alpha Catherine Reyes. One of your pack members attempted to murder a human you've publicly claimed as your mate. Jackson is no longer a member of my pack, Damien replied evenly. The damage is done, growled Alpha Robert Kane, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Viking saga. A pack member's actions reflect on their alpha's leadership. The fact that he felt justified in taking such extreme action suggests deeper instability. With respect, Damien said, his voice carefully controlled, Jackson's actions were those of a rogue wolf. I dealt with the situation as soon as I became aware of it. By banishing him from the pack, said another alpha, a younger man with silver eyes that seemed to see everything. But the question remains, what drove him to such extremes in the first place? The answer hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. Scarlett, your attachment to this human has caused unprecedented disruption, Alpha Reyes continued. Pack members hiring assassins, public scenes in restaurants, your own beta questioning your judgment. This level of chaos is unacceptable. The chaos, came a voice from the doorway, is temporary. Every head in the room turned as Scarlett walked in, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of professional outfit that suggested she meant business. She'd traded Damien's shirt for a crisp white blouse and pencil skirt, pulled her hair back in a severe bun, and somehow managed to project an aura of competence that belied the fact that she was a barista walking into a room full of supernatural predators. Ms. Hayes, Alpha Reyes said coldly, this is a closed council session. Humans are not permitted. Actually, Scarlett interrupted smoothly, setting her briefcase on the table and opening it with practiced efficiency. According to Supernatural Code Section 12.7, subsection C, any party directly affected by council proceedings has the right to representation. She pulled out a thick stack of official-looking documents and placed them on the table. I am here as Damien Blackthorne's officially registered emotional support human, with full legal standing to speak on his behalf in matters relating to our bond. The silence that followed was so complete that Scarlett could hear the air conditioning humming. Emotional support human? Alpha Kane repeated slowly. It's a new classification, Scarlett said confidently, pulling out more documents. Recognized under the updated Supernatural Integration Act of 2023. Designed to provide legal protection for human supernatural partnerships that serve therapeutic and stabilizing functions. She handed copies of the documents to each Alpha, watching as they examined the official seals and legal language with growing confusion. This is... Alpha Reyes flipped through the pages, frowning. This is surprisingly comprehensive. I'm very thorough, Scarlett replied, shooting a glance at Damien, who was staring at her with something that looked like awe mixed with terror. The question remains, Alpha Kane said grimly, whether your presence in Damien's life has been stabilizing or destabilizing. The evidence suggests the latter. Does it? Scarlett pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, ignoring the low growls from around the table. Because from my perspective, the instability came from pack members who couldn't accept their alpha's choice of mate. Your relationship has caused. My relationship, Scarlett interrupted, has caused exactly one problem. It forced Jackson to reveal that he valued his own prejudices more than his pack loyalty. That's not Damien's fault. That's not my fault. That's Jackson's fault. The human has a point, said the silver-eyed Alpha quietly. Furthermore, Scarlett continued, warming to her theme, every action Damien has taken regarding me has been protective, responsible, and in line with werewolf mating instincts. He secured my employment, ensured my safety, and defended me from threats. These are the actions of a stable, committed Alpha. He also embezzled pack funds, Alpha Kane pointed out. To buy a failing business and save jobs, Scarlett shot back. How is helping humans maintain their livelihoods contrary to pack interests? Isn't pack leadership supposed to include community stewardship? The Alphas exchanged glances, and Scarlett could see she'd scored a point. The poetry, Alpha Reyes said weakly, was concerning. The poetry was private, Scarlett replied firmly. And frankly, I don't see how Damien's creative expression, however questionable his font choices, reflects on his leadership abilities. Font choices? The silver-eyed Alpha looked confused. Comic Sans, Damien muttered, his face turning red. Oh, for crying out loud, Scarlett said, standing up and beginning to pace around the table. You want to know the truth about my relationship with Damien Blackthorne? Fine. Here's the truth. She stopped behind Damien's chair, placing her hands on his shoulders. He's a control freak with boundary issues who bought my workplace without telling me and has questionable interior decorating choices. She gestured vaguely in the direction of his penthouse. Seriously, who needs a golden toilet seat? Who even thinks of that? Several Alphas were now trying not to smile. He writes terrible poetry in fonts that should be banned by international treaty. He stalked me for 6 months before working up the courage to talk to me. And he has a disturbing tendency to make major life decisions on my behalf without consulting me. Damien looked up at her with an expression of growing alarm. But, Scarlett continued, her voice softening, he also spent his own money to save my job when I didn't even know it needed saving. He protected me from dangers I couldn't see. He listened when I told him his behavior was unacceptable, and he's been working to change it. She moved to stand in front of the table, facing all 5 Alphas directly. Most importantly, he's mine. And I'm his. Not because of some mystical mate bond or supernatural destiny, but because we choose each other. Every day. Despite his control issues and my tendency to blackmail people with their own journals. You blackmailed him? Alpha Kane looked impressed despite himself. In his own corporate lobby, Scarlett confirmed. Made him schedule me as his 3 p.m. emotional crisis. That's actually quite dominant behavior, the silver-eyed Alpha observed. I prefer assertive, Scarlett replied. The point is we work together. We balance each other out. He needs someone who's not afraid to call him on his shit, and I need someone who's powerful enough to protect me from psychotic ex-boyfriends and falling pianos. Falling pianos? Alpha Reyes looked confused. Long story, Damien said. Scarlett pulled out one final document from her briefcase. Damien's leather journal, which she placed on the table with ceremony. This, she said, contains some of the worst romantic poetry ever written. It also contains proof of a man who's so devoted to his mate that he spent 6 months trying to find the perfect way to tell her how he feels. She opened to a random page and began reading. Her laugh is like the tinkling of silver bells mixed with the chaos of a hurricane, and I would gladly weather any storm to hear it for the rest of my supernatural life. The room was silent. It's terrible, Scarlett said matter-of-factly. Absolutely awful. But it's also proof that this man loves me enough to embarrass himself on paper on a regular basis. And honestly, what more could you ask for in a mate? Alpha Reyes cleared her throat. Ms. Hayes, may I ask where you obtained these legal documents? The emotional support human classification is quite specialized. Scarlett smiled innocently. Oh, I made them up. The silence that followed was deafening. You made them up? Alpha Kane's voice was dangerously quiet. Completely fabricated, Scarlett confirmed cheerfully. I spent 3 hours at Kinko's with a laminator and some very official-looking letterhead I found online. You walked into a council meeting with fake legal documents, the silver-eyed Alpha said slowly. I walked into a council meeting with the audacity to defend my mate, Scarlett corrected. The documents were just for dramatic effect. Alpha Kane started to laugh, a sound like boulders falling down a mountain. Either you're completely insane, he said, or you're exactly the kind of mate an alpha needs. Both, Scarlett replied without hesitation. Both, Alpha Reyes agreed, looking at Damien with something that might have been respect. She's either your true mate or she's going to get you killed. Possibly both. Probably both, Damien said, reaching up to take Scarlett's hand. And I'm completely fine with that. The question, said the silver-eyed Alpha, is whether the pack can accept her. The pack, came a voice from the doorway, already has. Everyone turned to see Marcus entering the room, followed by Lydia, Elena, and several other pack members Scarlett recognized from the office intervention. We've been discussing the situation, Marcus said formally, and we've reached a consensus. Which is? Alpha Reyes asked. Scarlett Hayes may be human, Lydia said, but she's also the first person to successfully blackmail our Alpha, publicly humiliate him, and make him write better business proposals because he's desperate to impress her. My quarterly reports have improved significantly since we started dating, Damien admitted. She's made him better, Elena added. More grounded, more human, which somehow makes him a better Alpha. Plus, Marcus said with a grin, she threatened to feed his poetry to actual wolves if he stepped out of line again. We respect that level of creative problem-solving. Alpha Kane looked around the table at his fellow council members. All in favor of recognizing Scarlett Hayes as Damien Blackthorne's official mate and accepting their bond. 5 hands went up. Motion carried, Alpha Reyes said. Congratulations, you're officially mated to a werewolf. Great, Scarlett said, sinking into her chair with relief. Can I keep the $2 million as emotional damages? What $2 million? Alpha Kane asked. The embezzled pack funds, Damien said weakly. She still has the original suitcase. You're letting your mate keep embezzled money? Alpha Reyes looked amused. I figured she'd earned it, Damien replied. Between the stalking, the secret business purchases, and the assassination attempts, emotional damages seemed reasonable. What are you planning to do with $2 million? The silver-eyed Alpha asked curiously. Scarlett grinned. Expand Corner Grind into a supernatural-friendly cafe. Somewhere pack members can have their meetings over artisanal lattes instead of in corporate boardrooms. Maybe add some soundproofing for the howling. That's actually quite practical, Alpha Reyes said approvingly. I'm very practical, Scarlett agreed. Which is why I'm also establishing ground rules for this relationship. She pulled out a handwritten list and cleared her throat. Rule 1, no more stalking. If you want to spend time with me, ask like a normal person. Agreed, Damien said immediately. Rule 2, no more secret business purchases. If you want to help me financially, we discuss it first. Agreed. Rule 3, absolutely no more Comic Sans love poetry. Times New Roman minimum, preferably something with serifs. Agreed, though I reserve the right to continue writing terrible poetry in acceptable fonts. That's fair, Scarlett conceded. Rule 4, pack meetings at the cafe come with a 20% discount, but you have to clean up after yourselves. I'm not running a werewolf daycare. Marcus raised his hand. What about Jackson? Scarlett's smile turned predatory. Jackson gets to be the pack coffee fetcher. Permanently. Every meeting, every gathering, every social event, he's in charge of the coffee orders. That's, Alpha Kane considered this, actually quite humiliating for a werewolf. It's perfect, Damien said, looking at Scarlet with obvious adoration. Remind me never to cross you. Too late, Scarlet replied cheerfully. You already embezzled money and bought my workplace. You're on probation for at least 6 months. What does probation involve? You'll find out. As the council meeting officially dissolved into what looked suspiciously like a supernatural celebration, complete with impromptu howling and backslapping, Scarlet found herself pulled aside by Alpha Reyes. You realize, the older woman said quietly, that mating with a werewolf is permanent. As in, forever. As in, longer than human lifespans typically allow. Scarlet looked across the room at Damien, who was currently being congratulated by Alpha Kane on his exceptional mate choice, while Marcus regaled the group with the story of her lobby poetry reading. You know, she said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, the most exciting thing in my life was remembering to water my plants. Now I'm mated to a werewolf billionaire who writes terrible poetry and has a pack of supernatural predators who think I'm either insane or brilliant. And, Alpha Reyes prompted. And I've never been happier, Scarlet admitted. Even if he does have questionable taste in toilet accessories. Alpha Reyes laughed. Welcome to the pack, Scarlet Hayes. Try not to get him killed. No promises, Scarlet replied, watching as Damien caught her eye across the room and smiled. The kind of smile that made her heart do complicated things in her chest. But I'll do my best. 6 months later, Corner Grind Supernatural Cafe was the most popular werewolf hangout in Manhattan, featuring ethically sourced coffee, monthly pack meetings in the soundproofed back room, and a prominent sign reading, "No howling during business hours." Jackson, true to his punishment, had become the most efficient coffee fetcher in werewolf history, though he still grumbled about it regularly. And somewhere in Damien's office, locked in a drawer marked "Never Read Aloud Again," sat a new leather journal, this one written in elegant Times New Roman font, containing poetry that was only slightly less terrible than the original, but infinitely more treasured. After all, some things were worth keeping, even if they were written by a control-freak werewolf billionaire with questionable interior design choices and a tendency to solve problems by throwing money at them. Especially when that werewolf was yours. Epilogue, Ever After with Better Coffee. 2 years later, Scarlet woke up to the sound of howling. Not the terrifying, spine-chilling howling that had once made her think she was being stalked by a supernatural predator. This was more like the frustrated howling of a supernatural predator who'd discovered the coffee machine was broken. Again, Damien, she called without opening her eyes. If you broke another espresso machine, you're buying the industrial-grade one this time. The howling stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps padding across the hardwood floor of their shared apartment. A moment later, the bed dipped as Damien climbed back in, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. It's not broken, he said, his voice still rough from sleep and probably a little bit of residual wolf. Marcus tried to make his own coffee and may have experimented with the settings. What kind of experimenting? The kind that resulted in coffee strong enough to wake the dead and foam that achieved sentience. Scarlet opened one eye to look at him. His hair was sticking up in 12 different directions, there were coffee stains on his pajama pants, and he looked like he'd been wrestling with kitchen appliances. He was perfect. How sentient are we talking? It spelled out "help me" in the foam before dissolving. Impressive. She rolled over to face him properly, noting the fond exasperation in his storm-gray eyes. How long has Marcus been down there? Since 5 a.m. He's nervous about the interview. Today was the day Marcus was interviewing for a position as a social worker specializing in supernatural youth integration. A job that would use his natural protective instincts while helping young werewolves navigate the complicated transition between human and pack life. It was perfect for him, which was exactly why he was currently stress brewing coffee that could probably power a small city. I should go help him, Scarlet said, starting to get up. No, Damien said firmly, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her back against him. You should stay here and let me tell you about the dream I had. Was it the one where I'm wearing that ridiculous Victorian dress again? Different dream. This one involved you, me, a small human child with your eyes and my stubborn streak, and a coffee shop expansion that somehow included a playground designed specifically for werewolf puppies. Scarlet went very still. They'd been talking about children lately, carefully, hypothetically, the the way couples did when they were testing the waters of a conversation that could change everything. But this was the first time Damien had mentioned it unprompted, and definitely the first time he'd sounded like he was describing something he genuinely wanted rather than something he thought she might want to hear. A playground for werewolf puppies, she repeated. With extra strong equipment. Regular playground stuff would last about 5 minutes with pack children. And this child in your dream, did they have a name? Damien was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm. Catherine. After Alpha Reyes. She's been instrumental in helping us navigate the legal complications of human werewolf adoption procedures. Adoption procedures? Scarlett's heart did something complicated in her chest. Werewolf genetics are tricky, Damien said softly. There's no guarantee that our biological children would inherit supernatural traits. But there are always pack children who need families, cubs who've lost their parents, or whose parents can't care for them properly. Scarlett turned in his arms so she could see his face. You've really thought about this. I've thought about everything with you, he admitted. The house with the yard big enough for a pack barbecue. The expansion of Corner Grind into a full community center. The college fund we'll need to start saving for because pack children tend to be academically aggressive. Academically aggressive? They bite other students who get better grades. Of course they do. Scarlett laughed, then sobered as the full implications of what he was saying hit her. Damien, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? Instead of answering, he reached over to the nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. Oh my God. I know we said no more major life decisions without discussing them first, Damien said, sitting up and looking suddenly nervous in a way that reminded her of the man who'd once ordered 17 lattes just to watch her work. But I wanted to be prepared, for when the moment felt right. And this moment feels right, Scarlett asked, her voice coming out slightly breathless. This moment, Damien said, opening the box to reveal a ring that managed to be both elegant and practical. A simple solitaire diamond set in a band that wouldn't catch on things during the chaos of daily life. Feels perfect. The ring was beautiful, but what made Scarlett's heart race was the look on Damien's face. Hopeful and terrified and so full of love that it made her chest ache. Scarlett Hayes, he said formally. Will you marry me? Will you put up with my control freak tendencies and questionable interior decorating choices for the rest of our very long supernatural lives? Will you expand our coffee empire with me and help me raise pack children who will probably terrorize their teachers and definitely inherit your talent for creative problem solving? Are you going to keep writing terrible poetry? She asked. Almost certainly. In Comic Sans? Never again. I've learned my lesson. Are you going to trust me to make my own decisions, even when your werewolf instincts are screaming at you to protect me from everything including mildly challenging crossword puzzles? I'm going to try. Every day. For the rest of my life. And if I say yes, are you going to pick me up and spin me around like we're in some kind of romantic movie, probably knocking over furniture and definitely traumatizing Marcus further? Damien's grin was answer enough. Then yes, Scarlett said, laughing as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, I'll marry you, you ridiculous werewolf. But I have conditions. Of course you do. The wedding has to be at the cafe. And Marcus gets to be your best man because he's the one who actually told me about the assassination attempts. Done. And Jackson has to cater it. As part of his ongoing penance. That's either very generous or very cruel. Both, Scarlett said cheerfully. Just like me. Damien did indeed pick her up and spin her around, and they did indeed knock over the bedside lamp, which crashed to the floor with a sound loud enough to wake half of Manhattan. From downstairs came Marcus's voice. Everything okay up there? We're engaged, Scarlett called back. The resulting howl of joy was loud enough to set off car alarms in a 3-block radius. 6 months later, Corner Grind Supernatural Cafe was decorated with fairy lights, white flowers, and a banner that read "Congratulations to our favorite control freak and his emotional support human." The cafe had been transformed for the occasion, with the tables pushed aside to create space for dancing and the espresso machine draped in white tulle that made it look like a very caffeinated wedding cake. The guest list was an eclectic mix of supernatural creatures, coffee shop regulars, corporate executives, and one very nervous ex-boyfriend who'd somehow ended up on the invitation list due to what Scarlett insisted was closure, but everyone else suspected was spite. Jake Morrison sat in the back row, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, occasionally glancing at the exits like he was planning an escape route. which, considering he was surrounded by werewolves who remembered his assassination-adjacent behavior, was probably wise. "I still can't believe you invited him," Marcus murmured to Scarlett as she stood at the makeshift altar, the cafe counter, decorated with flowers and a sign reading, "Order here for eternal happiness." "I wanted him to see what a healthy relationship looks like," Scarlett replied, adjusting her simple white dress. Elegant but practical, perfect for a woman who'd probably be cleaning up after werewolves later. "Also, I may have mentioned to a few pack members that he was here, and I'm curious to see how long he lasts." "You're diabolical." "I prefer thorough." The ceremony itself was officiated by Alpha Reyes, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion and took obvious pleasure in pronouncing them, mated for life, may the moon witness their bond, and their bank account survive their joint business ventures. Damien's vows included promises to love, honor, and refrain from buying any more businesses without explicit written permission, while Scarlett's included a commitment to love, cherish, and only occasionally threaten to feed your creative writing to actual wolves. The first dance was to a song Marcus had specially commissioned called Lattes and Love, which was either the most romantic thing anyone had ever heard or the most ridiculous, depending on your perspective on supernatural country music. "No regrets," Damien murmured as they swayed together, surrounded by their chosen family of werewolves, humans, and one very efficient former assassin who'd been hired as wedding security and seemed to be enjoying his new career in event management. "About marrying a werewolf billionaire who once embezzled money to buy me a coffee shop?" Scarlett pretended to consider this. "Ask me again in 50 years. 50 years? Werewolf lifespans, remember? I'm going to be dealing with your control freak tendencies for a very long time." "Lucky you." "Lucky me," she agreed, and meant it. The real surprise came during the reception, when Victoria Sterling, who'd appointed herself wedding coordinator with her usual ruthless efficiency, announced that it was time for the traditional pack gift presentation. "Traditional pack gift?" Scarlett whispered to Damien. "Is that a real thing?" "It is now," he whispered back, looking as confused as she felt. One by one, the pack members came forward with gifts that ranged from practical Marcus, a commercial-grade espresso machine that could withstand werewolf strength, to absurd Lydia, a leather-bound journal with not-for-comic sans embossed on the cover, to genuinely touching Elena, a hand-carved wooden sign reading Blackthornhays Pack Den for their future home. Even Jackson, looking properly chastened in his role as head caterer, presented them with a gift, a certificate for a year's worth of free coffee service for any pack meetings, family gatherings, or emotional crises requiring caffeine intervention. "This is actually quite thoughtful," Scarlett told him, and watched him flush with what might have been pride. "I've learned a lot about customer service," he replied. "Mostly about how terrifying you are when someone screws up your order. I prefer motivational." The final gift came from Alpha Reyes, who stood up with the kind of ceremonial solemnity usually reserved for supernatural court proceedings. "Scarlett Hayes Blackthorn," she said formally, "the council has reached a decision regarding your status within the supernatural community." Scarlett felt Damien tense beside her. They'd been waiting for months to hear whether the council would officially recognize her as pack family, or if she'd remain perpetually classified as a human affiliate with special privileges. "We hereby grant you full status as pack matriarch," Alpha Reyes continued, "with all the rights, responsibilities, and legal protections that entails. You are now officially authorized to settle pack disputes, negotiate supernatural business contracts, and threaten anyone who annoys you with creative and unusual punishments." The cafe erupted in cheers, howls, and what sounded like someone breaking glassware in excitement. "What does pack matriarch actually mean?" Scarlett asked when the noise died down. "It means," Alpha Reyes said with a smile, "that you're now legally empowered to do all the things you've been doing anyway, but with official paperwork." "I do love official paperwork." "We know." Later that evening, after the last guest had gone home, Jake had fled sometime during the pack gift ceremony, possibly when Jackson had started telling increasingly detailed stories about the Coffee Fetcher Reformation program. Scarlett and Damien sat on the floor of their transformed cafe, surrounded by the detritus of their wedding celebration. "So," Damien said, pulling her against his side as they surveyed the chaos, "how does it feel to be officially mated to a werewolf?" "About the same as it felt yesterday," Scarlett replied. "Except now I have legal authority to settle pack disputes, which I'm definitely going to abuse. I would expect nothing less." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fairy lights twinkle in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, they'd start the process of cleaning up, planning their honeymoon. A week in a cabin in the mountains where Damien could run around in wolf form and Scarlet could read books without anyone trying to assassinate her, and beginning the complicated process of expanding their family. But tonight, they were just a woman and her werewolf, sitting in their cafe, surrounded by the evidence of a community that had somehow formed around their ridiculous love story. "Do you ever wonder," Scarlet said eventually, "what would have happened if I'd never grabbed that suitcase at the airport? You mean if you'd never discovered my terrible poetry and embezzled werewolf money? And if you'd never worked up the courage to actually talk to me instead of just ordering 17 lattes every day like a supernatural stalker?" Damien considered this. "I probably would have kept writing increasingly desperate poetry until I either found the courage to approach you or died of embarrassment. Marcus would have staged an intervention. You would have quit eventually because the cafe was going bankrupt, and I would have spent the rest of my very long life wondering what might have been. That's depressing. Very depressing. Which is why I'm grateful for airport baggage mix-ups and your complete inability to mind your own business." "Hey," Scarlet protested, elbowing him gently. "My inability to mind my own business is what led to us falling in love." "True. It's also what led to you blackmailing me with my own journal, threatening federal authorities, and crashing a werewolf tribunal with fake legal documents. Some of my finest work. All of your finest work." Scarlet leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the warm solidity of his presence beside her. In a few hours, they'd go home to their apartment, soon to be their house, once they found one with a yard big enough for pack gatherings and potential werewolf children. Tomorrow, they'd start their life as an officially married supernatural couple running a coffee empire and probably adopting pack cubs who would terrorize local schools with their academic aggression. It was going to be chaotic and unpredictable, and probably involve a lot more assassination attempts, poetry readings, and pack interventions than most marriages. It was going to be perfect. "Damien," she said sleepily. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter how long we live, no matter how many pack children we adopt or coffee shops we expand into, no matter how many werewolf politics we have to navigate, or how many times Jackson tries to redeem himself through increasingly elaborate coffee service. Yes. Promise me you'll never stop writing terrible poetry." Damien laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest and settling something warm and permanent in Scarlet's heart. "I promise," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I reserve the right to upgrade to better fonts." "Deal." And in the quiet of their cafe, surrounded by the remnants of their wedding and the promise of their future, Scarlet Hayes Blackthorn fell asleep against her werewolf husband's shoulder, dreaming of children with golden eyes and stubborn streaks, coffee shops that doubled as supernatural community centers, and poetry that was terrible enough to be perfect. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside Corner Grind Supernatural Cafe, all was peaceful, warm, and exactly as it should be. After all, some love stories were worth embezzling werewolf money for, even if they did start with suitcase mix-ups and Comic Sans poetry. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe for more.